Hi everyone, my name is Wojciech Pazdur, and well, I was afraid that there won't be that much people interested in photogrammetry right now because I was thinking that it's still not popular enough or it's already boring for most of you. But seriously speaking, looking how many things even here or on the other epics presentations are going around this subject, I'm pretty happy that I'm able to be here and tell you a bit about my own experiences on photogrammetry that started a very long time ago. First of all, my name is Wojciech Pazdur and I'm development director at the Farm 51, the company from Poland that is mostly taking care of the making of video games, but we are also doing the virtual reality and serious applications. So for our last projects, the last year Get Even was released. It's the multi-platform game published by Bandai Namco on PS4, Xbox One, and PC. It was done on Unreal 3 because we have started this project quite long ago. Then we have released so-called Chernobyl VR project, which is the virtual tour over the Chernobyl area for most of the major VR devices created in Unreal 4. And right now, I'm personally working in the survival horror game called Chernobylite. That was not fully announced yet, but today, because today is the anniversary of our Chernobyl disaster, we have slowly announced the title of the game on our social media channels. And we also got in our run the multiplayer online shooter called World War III that it's not to be covered today because it doesn't use photogrammetry that much. But how it all started? Funny thing, the connection between my work and Epic's technology started in 2001, and it started with something that was, let's say, the seed of photogrammetry research that I started to do, because in 2001, when I was working on the People Can Fly, the company that ultimately became the Epic Poland, we were not able to afford the Unreal Engine, buying the technology. It was Unreal Engine 2, I guess, back then, because it was too expensive for indie studio to be bought. So you see, today it's much easier because today everybody can use Unreal in whatever way he wants. But back then, we didn't have money to buy Unreal Engine, so the chief of the studio decided that we start to write our own engine, but because we didn't have that many of the programmers, then we didn't go into any fancy rendering techniques that was available then. We just have gone into the pure let's say, brute force rendering power, like putting as many data on screen as possible, meaning, for example, very high texture resolution. So, because we are able to use very high texture resolution, so we were one of the first companies in the world that made the whole levels, characters, and so on, covering with very detailed photographical textures. It didn't have much of the shaders, speculars, normal maps, but it was quite detailed as for this time, and the guy that you see in the front of the screen is me, not very well recreated, because it was not photogrammetry, it was just model of the fat guy, much fatter than I am, and it was covered with my photos, and these photos were then made dirty and ugly and bloody and so on. But basically, when we started to work on Painkiller, we started to use photographical textures, including, for example, the coverage of the street hall, photographed near my house, and so on and so on. So I have been running with the digital camera or around and making photos of everything and turning it into the textures for the models. That was more time effective and more detailed than painting this by hand in the high resolution. But there is first issues of using so-called photogrammetry, because we have also been photographing the cemetery graves. For example, here, some people realize that it's not very good that the graves in our game has the real covers of the real names of the real people, like Anna died being 28 years old, too early for her family, and so on. So we had to repaint a lot of it to change it. But anyway, that was the origins of, let's say, my work on the using photography to make a realistic or photorealistic 3D content. But in the meantime, we have been working on different projects, including Unreal 3 projects, and in 2013, we started to work on the game called Get Even, which is the, let's say, detective psychological kind of story, And then current machines was powerful enough to let us try to use photogrammetry on the full scale, meaning on the scale that I guess even for today most of the developers are not using. We have tried basically to scan everything what is possible and use handmade assets only when it was not possible to scan. So we have been scanning building interiors, characters, building exteriors, and so on. And it took us quite long time to make this project because we had some, let's say, organization and production and marketing and other issues. So this project took us much more than was expected because it was supposed to be released in late 2015. But it was more than 1 year delayed, and it appeared on the market ultimately at the beginning of first half of 2017. And then we have used similar approach, just let's say with better technology, output technology, which was only for Chernobyl VR project, which was a VR tour showing you or allowing you to explore parts of the Chernobyl area in the photogrammetry scanned environments. So right now, we are working on the game called Chernobylite, which is a bit combining both things that you saw before, like we got some survival horror and detective story. It's a game, and it will be mostly console-related, also PC, and hopefully VR. But we are using the Chernobyl environments that we have started to work on in 2015, and we are constantly going to this place and gathering new materials, and among others, we are improving our scanning and scan processing pipeline to be able to use all these visual assets in the more effective way. So basically, I guess everybody on this hall knows what the photogrammetry is all about, but just to make it short, and in case somebody missed it, photogrammetry is the way of creating 3D assets based on photos that are being processed and used for the 3D mesh and texture reconstruction. So technically speaking, not going into these details that much because it's not subject of this lecture, you are making a lot of photos, you need to make them in a specific way, and then you have some software that is recreating your 3D mesh with textures, and then if you process this mesh and these textures properly, you can use them as the assets in your game. So obviously there is a lot of issues to make this working well and to make all this pipeline working well, but I know there were already some lectures on this subject here, and there is a lot of materials over internet on this, so I will not focus that much on the photogrammetry itself. I will try to move a bit into the direction how it is to make the game that is almost purely based on the photogrammetry. So, first of all, what is always the best element of your working pipeline that you need to care mostly about? Any ideas?
Source material?
Yes, but I would go even higher level. It's an artist. Actually, really, the biggest issue we're working on the photogrammetry as artist, because first, photogrammetry is relatively easy when it comes to processing these 3D graphics, but it's always giving a strong resistance from the artist to work on the photographical or photogrammetry assets, because they would rather work on the handmade graphics. And it's actually a big issue. If you try to build your team to work on the photogrammetry project, then you need to make sure that people in the team won't be refusing to work on the 3D scan, and they won't be offensive about using scans in their pipeline, because ultimately it will pay off. So what's always the worst element of your pipeline is the same. It can be the artist. So depending on how you choose your team, then you will get different results. And this is very important. I will not focus on this much more, just I tell you, make sure that you work with people who understand why you are using photogrammetry. Because why we are using photogrammetry, first of all, of course, it gives us very high level of detail, and second of all, it allows us to, at least in certain scenarios, to significantly lower the cost or time of creating the art. And if people don't care that much about level of detail, or if they don't care that much about that you are, as the team leader, needs to keep the project on the budget or on the time, then you may have a problem with the people. But not going into this that much. What is not that obvious for many of the people. Photogrammetry allows you to save a bit on the concept art, because if you go to the places that you want to scan, if you are looking for the elements that you are needing to scan, then usually you can gather some source materials that can be very, very good for your concept art. Meaning you are doing some overpaints on them, but whatever you see here, just 2 of these 3 photos has been post-processed. One of the photos, the one on the left, it's the original photo from the Chernobyl exclusion zone. It's the river of Pripyat, and we have decided that we will try to recreate this one by one, because this view at this moment at one of the trips was so beautiful that we try to take this also as our concept art. But even if you are not fully into taking the real world location photos that you can into the concept art, then still you can use it as the reference material later on to compare the way how the game renders and how you structured your art direction and if it's going the right direction. So we got 3 different options here for the mood of the concept art, but they are all based on the photos that has been created during the scanning of these particular objects. Second on, the 3D scanning has its traps, because you can wish to scan some human characters, for example, in this case, but you prepared some concept art, but when it came to work on this real character in the real world, then it's, as you see, not very well following the concept art, and of course it's the joke photo made for fun, but actually sometimes it's very hard, and this is the drawback of photogrammetry. It's very hard to follow the specific concept art that you would like to maintain. So what is the conclusion here? It's that you need to go back and forth by refining your concept art toward the photogrammetry, but then sometimes to work on the photogrammetry to follow your concept art, and sometimes you got to do it few times if you will approach some of the problems. And then there is this, let's say, conflict or difference between making the handmade materials or procedurally based materials versus the scanned or photographical materials. Then procedural materials, you can make them, or handmade assets, you can make them in your office, but then often or very often they take you a lot of time and they are not looking photorealistic. I'm saying about the higher example. The lower example is then you can take very realistic results in the very short time, and the issue is that you need to go, for example, to Chernobyl to get the source materials. In this case, what at some point may be problematic for you, depending on what resources and what logistics skills you got. But at the end, why we are actually trying to do that much on the photogrammetry and photographies, even sacrificing our time to go to these places, is that at the end, the complexity of the stuff we are working here and we are working here versus the realism of it, it's still in our game world and in our needs of the post-apocalyptic and very detailed game world. It's still giving us a big advantage, like the material that you see here on the top took a lot of time, many days to be created. These materials took just few hours. It has much simpler structure because it has a few masks. It's still reflective, refractive, and whatever we need to achieve in this material, but it took much less time, and it's actually more optimal than the material above that was procedurally generated. And if you orient your pipeline into using more scans, then you are increasing your effectivity in this. Because if I would have a really great and really skilled artist that can use procedural tools to create new materials in procedural way, then of course I would be increasing my effectiveness in this way. But if I'm trying to do much and much with the scans and the people who are using scans, then we are achieving more and more into this direction. And obviously, we use so-called mood over paint. So whenever we got the locations that are real world and we want to scan and recreate them in the video game, that this slide is just to remember that going to level design, we cannot forget the art direction, which can change a lot depending on, for example, the complexity or quality of the scans or the materials that you need to collect, because it will be different if it's the day, it will be different if it's the night, and it will be different if it has to be dynamic weather change. So before you start and moving slowly a bit more toward the level design, you need to do the research and you need to do the concept, and it can be a difficult scenario because, as I mentioned already, you need to find the places or find the objects that you have to scan. Depending on what kind of game you are making, it may be easier or not. And then you need to research the places. For example, go there before you start thinking about scanning, go there and check if these places are good for you to be scanned. And it takes time. For example, when we have been working on the asylum mental hospital for GetEven, we have researched over internet about 100 of abandoned mental asylums. Then we have to go to about 10 of abandoned mental asylum. I mean, physically, in Poland, we have been traveling to different places before we have found the one that was really fitting our needs. So it was a time that we had to invest, but then this investment came out with the good results, because we have found this place, when we have worked on it, it gave us really good results in much shorter time, talking about the production. So if you start to plan your location or your level design based on the real photos, then you are again combining something what would be the classic way of doing level design, like planning the space, planning the actions, planning the game world, art direction, and so on. But all the time you need to be somehow connected to the fact that this real location looks like, for example, on these photos, or you will use these particular elements of this location inside your game, because usually most of the real world locations are much bigger than you need to be recreated into the game. Because, for example, to visit all rooms in this mental asylum, we would need to spend many hours just to go from one room to another. And for the gamer, if this is not this kind of game where you really want to focus on this, it's probably not very necessary, because if you are trying to create location that is just 1 hour or 30 minutes long in gameplay, then you probably need just 10 rooms or 15 rooms, not 200 rooms like it was in this building. So anyway, you need to be selective and you need to plan properly. And then, what is interesting, you can start to do your white boxes, meaning your sketches of your location in 3D, based on the rough scans of the location. In our case, we have just came for the first trip to this mental asylum, and we have roughly scanned as many rooms as we could, just to let us select which rooms will be good for our white box or for our level design. And we have very shortly recreated them with low level of detail. It was just 20, 40 photos per each room. Then we have do simply mesh reconstruction without physics, without care about the texture quality, but we have created a block out for the buildings that we wanted to recreate, and then it allowed us to select what elements of this building we really need to have included in our game, and then to focus only on these elements, because otherwise we would spend too much time on the scanning of unnecessary data. So this process also is back and forward, because first of all, you need to think about white box and level design and overall space arrangement. And second of all, you got some rough scans. So we are trying to make this white box basing on these rough scans. As even on this stage, it appears that some of the buildings are too tall, some of the buildings are too wide, some of the passages are not big enough for player to see everything you want to show, and so on. Talking about the space, I will move to it a bit later, but this iterative project, like this is not, we made the photos, then we made white box, then we are good to go. We usually make the photos, then we make a white box, then we make a first iteration of scans, then we make reiteration of the white box, and it takes a bit more time than just moving from point A to point B, but still it's saving you, ultimately it's going to save you a lot of time on the final asset production, so it's still worth doing. And anyway, for each game, if you approach, let's say, at least minimally iterative level design, especially for the explorative game, that anyway you would need to count on the fact that you need to redo your level design or redo your white boxes or the layouts of your levels. So if we go to think about using scans in the 3D location, then natural outdoor is the easiest case. If you look back to this location layout, then we got a lot of natural outdoor, meaning there is some ground, some tree, some bushes, and so on. And whenever it comes to something like this, natural outdoors is the easiest case because you design and produce it almost in the same way like you would do with any other art production technique. Meaning, you are using classic level design approach. You are layouting your space, you are placing the points of interest, you are doing some kind of art direction, mood painting, and so on. And whatever, and only things that you need to care about is the general optimization, because scanned assets can be relatively heavy, and you need to be precise on consistency of materials, because if you try to use different elements of scanned environment in different places, or they have been scanned in different conditions, or they have been scanned from different locations, that they may not fit each other. So usually the biggest issue for this kind of location is general optimization and fitting all materials together. But you can check the lecture of the guys from Megascans that are producing a lot of great assets that few of them we have also used in our tech demo. So you can check that it's on their promo materials, then it's very easy to arrange the big outdoor location using the generally scanned 3D assets. But you need to watch out for big and heavy objects, because, for example, here we got this forest, but it is forest of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and then we are approaching a big house. Well, it's not a big house, but comparing to the other objects, it's quite big in scale. So if it's scanned, it utilizes a lot of textures, especially a lot of textures. It can also utilize a lot of polygons or vertices. So these big objects can be a hiccups for your application, for your performance. But anyway, it's still just a matter of optimization how you handle this. It's not that much influencing your level design. You just need to take care about how you do your assets, and handmade assets can give you the same troubles if they are not prepared properly. The harder cases is using the building elevations, because first of all, to access different parts of the building, especially the top, the roof of the building, you need to do, let's say, some tricks, like, for example, use drone scanning. And then I will try to play you a small video that was not, I guess, published publicly ever, but this is how we did our first drone scans of the buildings for GetEven.
W studiu skanowania 3D nie możemy narzekać na nudę. Zespół GetEvena dostarcza nam coraz to nowych wyzwań. Czasami, tak jak w tym wypadku, trzeba było zrobić zdjęcia 30-metrowej betonowej konstrukcji. Wymyśliliśmy, że można by użyć do skanowania, do wykonywania fotografii pod skany dronów. Nie mogą to być takie drony, które można kupić w każdym sklepie, które w zasadzie są zabawkami. Musimy użyć sprzętu, który jest co najmniej heksakopterem i uniesie lustrzankę cyfrową razem z obiektywami. Proces skanowania rozpoczyna się od wykonania bardzo dużej liczby zdjęć obiektu. Musimy obfotografować go dookoła. Musimy mieć specyficzne warunki oświetleniowe, przez co problematyczne jest robienie zdjęć obiektów na zewnątrz. Potem zdjęcia są obrabiane i zaczyna się, można powiedzieć, magia, ponieważ z serii płaskich zdjęć dzięki technice zwanej fotogrametrią i zaawansowanym mocom obliczeniowym uzyskujemy model 3D taki, jak widać za mną.
So, of course, this is not very spectacular case of photogrammetry, because it was like 4 or even 5 years ago. But today, as you even see on this picture, we are scanning using similar technique with much higher accuracy. We just don't need to use that big and heavy drones like it was before, because today often the regular drones like DJIs are capable of doing a relatively good resolution photos, and they are easily programmable, or they are easier to program, so we can also somehow automatize this project. But anyway, big building elevation are the hard case, because first you need to do much more of the preparation to be able to scan this object. Then this object, if it is big, and it has to be customized. It's not easy to optimize, and usually it has some inaccessible areas, and it's not that easy to process. The other thing is that these objects are not easy to create good scalable LODs. Like, these objects are big, so you need to utilize the level of detail version of the object, but it's not easy to create the compelling level of detail versions of these objects to make them good looking from the distance and good looking from the close distance. Anyway, I'm not going into the way how to process the mesh to make a good looking LODs. I'm just making you aware that if you want to use the big scale objects on the scanned matter, that it really matters if you want to approach these objects from the distance and from the nearest distance, or if you are just putting them into the one location. And obviously, in this case, for example, you see the problem with the holes, meaning the inaccessible areas of the building because there were some trees or there were some other buildings, so you couldn't fly drone around, and these holes has to be somehow filled up and reconstructed with this way or this way materials. And we are also trying, or we have been trying to create the tileable elevation modules, but they usually were not working well for different reasons, mostly because of the amount of work that you need to spend on this kind of work to make it really usable. Because anyway, as you see, this building is quite custom shaped, but we have been trying to use tileable texture on this, and it was simply not looking that good. So ultimately, we have decided that we use lower resolution but customized texture to make it look really good. And sometimes we are also using scanned white boxes, meaning having ability to quickly scan something from the air. We can at least get the first idea of the white box for the level or location, even if you usually is not surviving the trial of time, because for gameplay reasons or optimization reasons or for whatever other reasons, we need to change it. But to make a first white box using just plain and simple scan, it's quite a good idea. But with some objects, the issue is that your objects may disappear before you finish your work. What you see on the right is the nuclear reactor of Chernobyl power plant, the one that has been destroyed during the catastrophe. And on the left, you see the cover that was supposed to hide it for the next 100 years. So today, this cover is over this reactor, and you are not able to scan it. So actually, when we wanted to have this scan, we had to go there in the very bad weather condition. It was very cold because it was end of November, beginning of December, and it was the last moment where we could scan it, because then it was covered with this new sarcophagus, and for the next 100 years, nobody will have access. So just to funny note, we probably made the digital copy of the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl, but it was not very high quality. So it was still more like the good sketch and good base module for processing these assets into the different assets, but it was good to have it because right now we don't have access to this location, and it may happen for many things that you are working on. And then we come to interior design, which is the hardest case. You may find a lot of games that already utilize the scanned assets on the outdoors or utilize the big scanned buildings or mountains. Many of them are being done on Unreal Engine 4, but almost no game developers are using 3D scanning to reconstruct the building interiors for many reasons. First of all, modularity and customization is very hard to, let's say, maintain the level design when it's being built with the scanned interior rooms, corridors, because usually you need a totally different arrangement of the space that is available on the place. And it's not just about the layout of how the building is structured, it's also even about the size of the corridors, it's about the about the width of the passages, it's about the height of the ceiling. We simply, for the game, are usually doing different proportions of the objects that they are appearing in the normal world. So usually the doors that exist in the real world are too tight for proper gameplay experience or for easy passaging from one room to another. So you need to widen the doors. Normally for level design or gameplay reason or story reasons, you don't need to exactly this room be connected with this room because you need something different. And this modularity and customization is very hard to maintain. Even if it's doable, it's not easy and it's not possible for every kind of game to be used. And elements need to somehow connect in geometrical way because it doesn't make sense to scan the interior of the building as a one piece. You usually need to anyway divide it into the many elements that I'll show later how we do it, but connection between the elements are also problematic both on level design and art production from. And then the space arrangement, as I said, it's not that easy to be controlled because real-world location simply suck on level design. And they suck from perspective of the, let's say, gaming expectation. But moving to what is being used in the interior, so the props, like the small elements that you want to use in the interiors, are relatively easy to handle because you scan the small elements, the same as for the outdoor areas. You scan chairs, you scan furnitures, you scan some other details, and if you were able to scan them properly, then you can make the modular assets from them and you can use them anytime, so it's a simple scenario. It's always needed to keep consistency in materials because if you have objects taken from different rooms, some of them has been reconstructed by hand, some of them has been altered to look in proper way, then you always are fighting with the consistency in materials, and it takes you usually much more time than you do when you use the handmade assets. And the big issue is consistency between the scanned and non-scanned content. So whenever it comes that you need to create some of the elements of the game by hand, then it's even harder to maintain the consistency of materials, lighting, textures, and everything that is related to the rendering. And mentioned before the scale issues, the reality is not, especially in the tight interior, is not good for level design. As mentioned, we have, for example, for Get Even, but for new game as well, we have been fighting a lot just, for example, widening the doors because player was always colliding with the frame of the doors because the normal doors in the normal building are usually too tight to move from one place to another. The other things are orienting the player or showing him the paths. In the normal building, it's being done different than in the level design of the video game because in the level design of the video game, we usually want to track player to notice certain elements and to go following these elements, whatever they are, because it depends on the game design. But in the real-world location, the locations are totally chaotic looking at this. Because when you enter the building that is scanned, you don't know where to go, and you need to add a lot of special things to guide player. But even if you want to guide player in a certain way, then it's harder to put all these guidance elements inside the scanned location because the scanned location is somehow fixed, and you cannot, for example, place lamps anywhere you want in the scanned location. So you can, of course, try to do some tricks like place the light sticks or place some graffitis on the wall and so on. But anyway, it's the extra work. Then you need to go on the processing the scan that it's not that obvious at the beginning. And then we are coming to the modularity itself. So we have been trying most of the time to maintain the modularity in the way that we treat a single room as a single module, talking about the interior design, because it's the most natural way. Like within the one room, you usually stop player to give him some action or give him some things to do. We are usually doing the custom light setup for every room. We are usually trying to do some meshing for every room. So we have been trying to do more modular, let's say, split between different elements of the room, like separating the walls, separating the ceiling, separating the floor. But then we have been losing a lot of quality of the fact how this room look in total. So right now, we usually are trying to look for the proper rooms to be scanned as the whole. But it's not that hard because in most of the locations we are going on, we have much more rooms than we need. For most of the buildings, as I mentioned before, we need just 10 rooms to be open and to be allowed to be explored, and we usually have access to 100 of the rooms. So as you may imagine, we are selecting the rooms to be scanned. We are choosing the best rooms that fits both gameplay and artistic or optimization on scanning proceeding, and then we are scanning only selected of them, and it's usually the most convenient way at this moment. So optimally, you need to scan the empty rooms, because optimally you would like to arrange them somehow. And it's funny because actually the countries where I work, meaning the Poland and the Ukraine, are very good for this, because all abandoned buildings are being robbed totally. As you see, it's absolutely nothing inside. Even the doors has been stolen, which is good. Because you got just walls and ceilings and the floor, and if you scan this, then you can create some assets to fill it in. Just the problem that sometimes you don't have these assets on site. You need to get them from somewhere else. But originally, we planned to make the British asylum in the Get event, because the action is taking place in UK. But when we have researched just few of the abandoned British asylums, we have saw that there is a lot of stuff inside, like the furniture, wheelchairs, wardrobe, everything else, and then to scan it and to empty it, we would need to have much more of work, either on scanning phase or processing phase. But when we have started to explore the Polish abandoned mental asylums, it appeared it's perfect. So then, of course, when you scan, you need to do the lighting, meaning eliminate the influence of the lights. And I would not focus that much on this, because there is several tools or processes proposed even by Epic about how to do it. I just wanted to say that we have been spending a lot of time on this, and we found out that at least for us and for the interiors, the best way to delight it is to simply use the proper light setup on the moment of scanning. Like we are usually bringing a lot of scanning equipment with us, and lighting equipment with us. We are putting the lights in proper places, and it's much faster than any post-processing methods. It doesn't always work well, but it saves us a lot on the post-processing, or it eliminates the need of the post-processing. So I will just play a part of the next movie to show you how we scanned, or how the scanned assets for Get Even looked like.
A new meaning. Everything. That building. And even make it a part of a dark video game. We could do the same with every building in the world, and you could enter it.
That was some promotional material, and obviously it was not optimized, it was not real-time back then, but I guess it doesn't matter, because you will see in a moment how it may look in the real-time. However, what is important, the lightning and delightning process was very painful at the beginning, especially if you go into the location that is abandoned, because then you cannot use electricity there. So you need to, if you want to use light on site, your own light sources, you need to have some strong batteries or even some gas generator. For example, in Chernobyl, we often work with the gas generator to allow us to light the location and have the proper delighting. What is funny here, that was, this is the, let's say, comparison of first scan and last scan that we have done. And of course, you see the last scan we have done is delighted, but it has some extra graffiti, because in the meantime, somebody painted the walls. It's unfortunately the big issue. Or for example, here, when we did the first scan, the one on the right, there was the light included because we didn't delight it on site. So on the left, you see it's not properly shown, but you see that it doesn't have the, let's say, backlight. It only has the light that comes from the engine, but there is a pile of the wooden beams or other trash inside the area. So when you spend more time working on the project, you can expect also surprises like this. But it's interesting that you rework the player paths into a completely different way than they are in the relocation. This is just a simple example. We needed passage from one room to another. We didn't want player to go back to the corridor and then look for another entrance. So we spent a lot of level design work on altering the scans and moving the extra passages between the objects. But I just wanted to show it's possible, and it's not that a big problem if you don't see a proper layout of your location. If you know how to handle this, you can find some tricks how to omit the natural obstacles. And at the end, it was always like in the previous project, in the current project, and you are rearranging the whole original layout of the location, meaning finally you got all the pieces that you have gathered, but to make the ultimate level design, you are getting, as you see on the shape of these rooms and shape of the outside of the building, how it will look outside. If you go into the interiors, you are getting completely different layout than it was originally, what is actually not a problem. So we have been very worried at the beginning that if we place rooms like this, then there will be feeling of inconsistency, like you are on the outside of the building, then you see the plain wall. But if you go inside the building, then you will feel that some of the rooms are bigger or smaller or shifted, but no, actually nobody ever noticed it on the playtest, and nobody playing the game finally that was released ever noticed it. So it's very important to maintain the corridor modularity, because corridors or the staircase are connecting all of your rooms or your halls, if they are bigger halls, and you need to keep them modular. So it's up to you how you do it, because sometimes, as you see here, we have just divided corridor in some shorter or longer chunks, and we have been creating the connection between them in the proper way to feed off the grid and look well. But anyway, you don't need to focus that much on the modularity of the rooms, but you need to focus a lot on the modularity of the corridors. And for the same reason, to keep them looking consistent, you need to work hard on the texture and light balancing, because depending on when you scanned these assets or what was the natural light between these assets, it may ruin your experience. So if you keep passages and connection modular, then you can make your rooms unique and custom. And we are doing this on the purpose. Like, we are not focusing that much on the corridors and passages, because anyway, they are usually tight, and the usually player is mostly using them to move from one place to another. So we rather focus on the places that are goals, certain rooms, certain halls, certain spots of interest, and then we don't need to spend that much time of making these modules. Of course, we spend a lot of time on making these modules, but we don't need to focus that much on their quality, because it's more important what player will find at the end of his road when he enters the room than how he approaches the room. And passage customization modules, because as you see, these modules doesn't look beautiful. They are just plain and simple, but we are decorating them with some other modules that was actually also scanned. So we are scanning and making a modularity also for the small elements that are being used for customizing the passages to finally make them look good. And we are also scanning the decals or other small elements that we are attaching to the walls to add another layer of customization for all the objects. And then I will switch to show you a bit of the project that we are working on and to illustrate a bit the things that I have been talking about. It will just may take a few seconds to load, because it's not an optimized build, and we have not been showing it that much to the public yet, so I will skip through some initial sequences. I think you can lower the sound totally, because I will be speaking. So first of all, not going that much into the design of the game, we get some basement that is modularly arranged, like we got modules for the walls, and this is why we have put a lot of additional elements to cover the fact that so far, as you see here, or maybe you not see, the modules of the wall are basically the same. We are also using tile-level ground texture, but it's it's typical arrangement for the video game indoor location. It's just most of the elements you see here have been scanned. So I will not focus on this that more as I will focus on the exploring the Chernobyl zone in the selected location that I want to show you. Yeah, texture streaming. You need to care about this, of course. Yeah, why not? Okay, so as you see here, this outdoor location example. So again, I believe it's looking quite nice, but there's nothing really new here, besides of the fact that elements here are, let's say, quite detailed, and they have been quite polished to look well together. So we got scanned ground textures. We got, let's say, classic foliage system just created with quite detailed photographies. We got some elements that are interactive, whatever, but we got also some decorative elements that has been scanned. So whatever you see here have been scanned in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, with exception of the few trees or rocks that we have borrowed from the Megascans library. And this is this relatively easy case. If you make a good scans or you have a good scans, then you can arrange this kind of environment quite easily, especially because Unreal 4 has good tools for the terrain texture. It has good tools for meshing the foliage and so on. So it's not that complicated having this amount of assets to create something like this. Of course, I'm just saying like this. It spent us a few months to create this part of the location, and it was a lot of let's say, bad elements that were not looking good before we have achieved this result. But anyway, assuming that we are still a team of 16 people working on this project, I believe, and only 2 or 3 people were working on the outdoor location. So I believe we have proven that using scan on this location can provide you with some good results. So I just need to go through some story sequence, like approach the crows to see the goals of the girl behind the trees and so on, because there's also a bit of story demo that I will not, let's say, disclose that much. But whatever you see here, from the small to the big object, has been scanned and processed in more or less optimal way. Like, still we got some unoptimized element, and still the frame rate is not great because I have like 25 frames here it's on the laptop, on the good laptop, but it should be higher. But anyway, we still didn't reach the optimization phase yet. I just need to wait for the guys, I guess, to go. Yeah, because I need to sneak here through the toxic corridor. And again, passage that you see here is very ugly. It's just low poly texture, maybe not very low poly, but it's just some generic texture put on some generic mesh. But as I mentioned, for the passages, if you play well with light and effects, then you may not care that you don't have that great scans. What matters is that you need to have good scans or good assets whenever it comes to your goal. So what you may find interesting here is the building. The building was example of some of the issues that I have mentioned before. Like, for example, we didn't have access to all sides of the building. So one side of the building has been scanned, and the second part of the building has been recreated with use of the substance painter, which was actually painful process because the scanned part have been done with like 3 days, and the modularly procedurally recreated part has been done like in 3 months. So we have reached the moment where I'm not purely sure if the left wall is scanned and the right wall is procedurally generated, or the other way around, because we have been trying to reach this moment. But anyway, it took us a few months to get these results for this building. So right now we are rather trying to reconstruct all the missing parts with the scanned textures, and we use substance painter or procedurally generated textures only in the place where there is absolutely no possibility to use photographic materials. And what may be also interesting, the mural graffiti, the picture you see on the wall, the propaganda picture, is the decal that has been taken from the other building, because we really wanted to have this decal in this place, but it has been borrowed from the other building because we didn't scan this building that has this mural. We just took some elements from it and attached it to the object that we want to have here. And what you see here in the background is the handmade object. It is the big radar antenna. It's called Eye of the Moscow, or the Duga. It's really standing in the Chernobyl exclusion zone because it was supposed to detect the nuclear strike from the USA to Soviet Union. It was never operational, but it was built in proximity of the Chernobyl power plant because it consumed enormous amounts of power. And it was also, I'm just mentioning this because it was also supposed in part of conspiracy theories to use to the controlling mind of the people with help of the electromagnetic pulses, and we are using this conspiracy theory in our game. So whenever you see some supernatural elements in our game, you may expect that it's somehow related to influence of the magnetic waves from this object. So what we see here is the illustration of how we maintain the modular level design here, meaning the walls have in the corridors, the walls have quite repetitive texture, but it's being covered with bunch of scanned objects, with bunch of scanned elements, and with proper light arrangement to not make you feel that is very repetitive. And whenever you enter the room is usually scanned exactly like it is. So whenever it comes to the room as a chunk of the level, it's scanned purely. It's decorated with some of the extra objects, like this room was more empty, but we have added a table here, we have added some electronic devices here, and we have added some propaganda posters that was not present exactly in this room because that was the arrangement that we wanted to achieve for this particular room. We have also placed some gameplay or interactive objects there, but the same we can talk about every other room we will visit here. Like, it has been scanned by custom, and it was connected with modularly built corridor. And the layout of these rooms or even their interiors are not exactly what was in this particular building, but we have arranged it to give players something to find here or then, and how we wanted to guide player through this explorative part, because we will start to show some creepy things, like this also, of course, scanned doll. Just we scanned this doll in the kindergarten and put it here just because we believe it's cool. And here we got another modular part, which is the staircase, which is again using a bit more of repetitive or non-customized elements, but it's being decorated with some elements that are hiding these facts, including, for example, here the scanned or photographed glass that is using as a decal to cover the fact that this floor is repeating its texture quite a lot. And right now we are going to a bit more of horror location, so we are actually having the same corridors. We just didn't need to customize them that much, because here we got some toxic fumes and here we got some gas marks on our face, so the picture is blurred because we are entering some let's say horror location. So we got some extra gameplay or scaring elements in form of these toxic barrels that was not present in this room particularly, but they were present in other rooms. So we have scanned them in other rooms, and we have moved them to this room to let us simply arrange this in the way how we wanted it. So again, room after room, we have been scanning relatively empty places. Then we have been filling them with some assets depending on how much space we had to fill. And as you see here, the normal room in this normal shape, it's quite wide. Like, small room is really small, and normally player feel quite claustrophobic. What in this part of the game is okay. So this is why we have left the claustrophobic room at the end of on this building here, because here we wanted to feel claustrophobic because this is the horror sequence. But whenever we have been doing the free exploration, like on the floor above, we have been leaving the bigger rooms, not necessarily the room that exactly was here. Yeah, so here we got some scanned guy who have been overpainted with some glowing shaders and some special affixes to look like he's something very strange and dangerous. And this is also way how we process the scans. Like we are sometimes transforming them into the fantastic objects, non-realistically looking objects, even if this was the same guy that was somehow present before in the forest. So again, we are repeating some of the buildings or some of the building structures or some of the shaders. However, we always customize them with extra decals or with extra painted or overpainted or decaled elements. And we are mostly taking care of the fact how the optimization works here. This is probably the heaviest element of this area, and its frame rate is just before 20 frames per second right now, because here we didn't fully utilize the streaming and we didn't fully optimize the texture resolution. However, we did some tests already, and it won't be that painful actually in a moment. So just to show you some extra part before we finish. Again, the same approach, like scanned rooms or scanned hall, filled with some small scanned elements, and filled also with some non-scanned elements, because, for example, these metal boxes here, they were a bit too complex or too complicated. Their scan didn't work out. So we used the photos that we have been created for need of scanning to make a texture that was projected on the ultimately hand-modeled objects. And what you see in the down of this building, the first floor of this building, are totally abstract composition of different rooms and different corridors. That was absolutely, it didn't have anything to do with the reality of the location, because in these situations we wanted to create some specific layout for some gameplay reasons that I do not have time to show. But anyway, if you look carefully, it's not very consistent, because on these walls you got like brown textures, and on these walls you got like green textures. So obviously that was not like exactly moving from green room to the brown room. It was simply corridors or passages taken from totally different locations and totally different places. So once for all, I just wanted to say you don't need to be that scared of the modular level design based of scans, because both publicly available libraries, like for example Megascans or some packages that are available on Unreal Market Store, like the customized assets that some people are doing that you can do or we can do for you, they are simply capable of being processed into modular level design. You just need to have specific game, and you just need to have very specific art direction that is supposed to be recreated in this way. So thank you very much for your attention.